Welcome to Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, where we are on a mission to answer 4 questions from some of the best leaders and leadership minds in the country. So with that, we welcome our special guest, Dr. Phillip Shero. Welcome, Phillip.
Hey, Dave. It's great to see you.
Hey, great to have you. We're looking forward for this one for a while. So introduce yourself to our listeners, a little bit of the background, kind of, what's the scoop, who you are, what you do.
Yeah. Well, I'll back up and tell you where my journey started. Right out of grad school, I was 23 years old, and I moved to Equatorial Africa and lived there for 15 years. Laura and I moved over there because we wanted to be part of something bigger than ourselves. Also, it was a huge adventure.
Well, I bet. I mean, I don't know too many people I've interviewed. They're like, yeah, I got out of grad school, just went off to Africa. It's something about that equator heat, we just couldn't deny.
Uganda was a beautiful place to live. It's kind of subtropical, waterfalls behind the house and just green everywhere. And of course, monkeys and all the wildlife and everything else. It was a really adventurous place to live, but it was also an opportunity, we felt like, to make a difference, do something in a part of the world that has not received its share of all the goods that have come to other places. While we were there, we ended up taking on this vision to start a new university. And we did that because we saw this huge gap between the needs of the countries of sub-Saharan Africa and what they were hoping to become. But there was so many endemic problems, like AIDS was a huge issue, first recognized in Africa, and continued to just decimate populations. There were civil wars. There was a lot of corruption in the government, and there was a brain drain of anybody that got some education would flee to other parts of the world where they could make a better life. So all of these problems were going on, and we realized the work that we were doing was not directly addressing those, because 50% of the country was under 15 years old. So huge youth population,
wow,
huge needs, huge gaps. And talking to people that were living there, they said, well, if we could get a quality, relevant education here in our home country, then maybe leaders would stay here, and maybe African leaders would be trained and equipped, and they would start making a difference in all of these different areas where the needs are so great. And we said, well, great, we'll be on the supply side. So we built a university. It was focused on leadership.
Nice.
Right from the beginning, ethical, empowered, employable leaders in every sector of society. And a huge challenge, a huge task, but super rewarding. And we moved back to Texas 11 years ago and started Masterminds Leadership to help bridge some of the gaps that we were seeing in business in America.
Nice. Oh, depending on the part of Texas, you just about as hot as Uganda.
Yeah. Yes.
Sometimes not as green, though.
For sure. Yes.
and slightly less monkeys.
Yeah. Well, that depends.
Well, yeah, that's true. It depends on where you're at. But yes. Yeah, the wildlife isn't quite as diverse, I guess.
Yes. As sometimes the monkeys are inside your company.
Well, all right, true. Very, very true. Very, very true. So you were talking about that being a daunting task. I mean, you just show up kind of two bare hands, and all of a sudden, hey, we're just going to create a university out of thin air. Yeah. No small feat.
Yeah, I think a lot of your audience that are themselves entrepreneurs will understand our vision and our what we want to achieve is bigger than our abilities. But people gathered around that vision, and a team got built and established, and it happened. It took a decade.
Wow.
It took 10 years to open the doors of that university. But what a huge impact from people gathering around a big vision.
No, that's awesome. Well, like any other entrepreneurial journey, whether it's building a university or a business, it takes a while. You don't just flip the switch and all of a sudden you're good to
Mhm.
go. What are the stats that 90% of businesses fold after what, 5 years, 3 to 5 years, and the
Yeah.
ones that make it to 10 are
Yes.
kind of rare. So kudos on mastermind leadership making it to 10.
Yes. Thank you.
I was to say recently you had some celebrations, I believe.
We did. We had a 10-year anniversary celebration and had current and past clients come and kind of cheer us on. It was a great night.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. That sounded. I saw some of the pictures, and I was like, "Oh, that looks like it was really, really was a special event."
Yes. Yes, it was. We live in North Texas, so Dallas Fort Worth is
Okay.
our main region of work, and in Irving or in Las Colinas, there's a Williams Square Tower, 26 floors, and there's a club on the top of that that has 360-degree windows all the way around,
Oh, nice.
and it's the tallest point between the two big cities of Dallas and Fort Worth, which together form the S. And from that tower, you can see the Dallas skyline and the Fort Worth skyline, and
Oh,
AT&T Stadium and Globe Life Park for the Rangers and DFW Airport. You can kind of see it all. So it just elevates that perspective to see the growth that's been going on, all the businesses that are represented in this region. So it's a nice place to have an event.
that honestly sounds like it. So when we're off air, I'll tell you about a mutual friend and colleague that lives in Carrollton.
Yes.
So since you talked about the DFW, I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah." So
Yes.
there's some folks
Yes.
out there. So how about we jump right into the first question? What does leadership mean to you, and what does good leadership look like?
Yeah, so other people have talked about this before, so I'm going to take a running start at it. As John Maxwell says leadership is influence,
Yes.
one word. And the great Peter Drucker said a leader is someone with followers. I like both of those definitions because they're simple, but you ask, what is good leadership?
Yep.
So
Kind
I'll
of a
give
two kind
you,
of a two-part question. What does leadership mean to you, but also what does good leadership look like?
yes. So the Dr. Phil answer to what is good leadership is three letters, ROI. And
Mm.
ROI stands for replication, ownership, and influence. To me, those are the three qualities that make a leader a good leader or make good leadership. And I'll just briefly unpack that.
Yeah, please
I'll
do.
work in reverse. So the influence part of ROI, the I, um, is about genuinely being able to influence not just the actions and choices of other people, but even their thinking, influence how
Mm.
they think and what they value, which is going to drive behavior. And that's I think what John Maxwell is talking about when he says leadership is influence, the ability to extend that influence to other people, and it's not positional power. It's that the moral authority. Um,
Right.
the ownership piece, to me, maybe you've seen the Navy SEALs guys that wrote the book on extreme ownership.
Jocko Willink. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
great book, great set of guys. Yeah, love them.
It's that concept of I take ownership for everything that happens downstream of me, even if it wasn't my fault.
Yeah.
I think good leadership doesn't just say, "Oh well, the ball's in my court," or "Oh, now it's in your court, so it's not my deal anymore." It's, well, if I want the outcome of this to work, then sometimes I have to step across the net and make sure that things are going to go well over there. Or if someone drops the ball or something goes sideways, instead of blaming or excusing, I think good leaders are willing to take responsibility for the total outcomes, not just say, well, that was mine or that wasn't mine. The replication piece, the R of ROI, is where I see a lot of would-be good leaders sort of come right up to the line and stop. Because what happens after you? It's investing in the next generation, investing in successors, coaching and mentoring others so that you replicate yourself.
Well, it's funny you mention that because at some level, listening to them, you're kind of thinking, okay, yeah, you might not have done it, but you're the fool that hired this guy and trained him. So at some point, right? Yes, did you make a good hire? Did you train him and equip him properly? Did were you clear on the expectations? And so, I mean, even the folks that like to get into the blame game, there's still a whole lot of still downstream.
Yeah.
A whole lot of that. So, no, that's a good point. I like the ROI analogy. All right. Well, we will close out this segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, and we will be back with our next set of questions. We'll see you in a minute. Welcome back to Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. Well, we are here with Dr. Phillip Shero, and we're going to jump headlong into our second question. So what was one of the biggest leadership challenges you've had to face?
Definitely misalignment between founders and a board.
That sounds like a story. Do tell.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'll say up front, this did get resolved after my time, but I didn't solve it. So this is one of those leadership challenges where I faced the challenge and was not successful. So the vision for the university in Africa, there were really three co-founders that conceived that together, and the three of us worked together. And over time, some people were moving back to the U.S., so there was physical distance and not as much communication, and vision began to diverge. And when that happened, communication suffered, and I felt like if I had just kept performing really well, that the results were going to speak for themselves. That was my thinking, and that I could sort of ignore this uncomfortable, well, we may be looking at it a different way. We may have a little bit different end goal or different vision. Maybe that would be overshadowed by good resuls.
Gotcha.
That was not the case. And the fractures grew. In addition, the way that it was set up in the beginning, there were actually 4 different boards. So there was a funding board, there was a government mandated board, there was a board of the primary donors, and an in-country board of the other people that were working in country, and they actually owned the land that the university was built on. Well, structurally, that was a mess, because even with the best of intentions, you're not going to get all of those different stakeholders on the same page.
Bad enough answer to one board, much less 4. My God.
Yes. Yeah. So at the time, it was easier to lead down and to lead laterally than it was to lead up, and go to each of those boards and have some hard conversations and say, hey, look, our structure's not sustainable. We need to make some changes. We need all of your help and buy-in to consolidate this and create clarity for the organization, create clarity on the vision and the results we're trying to accomplish. And so, the discomfort of having those conversations, and at the time I was a much younger leader, didn't feel like I had the clout to go and sort of initiate some of those. But the fallout was that the vision stagnated. I lost my leadership position in that organization, and relationships were damaged. So, that was a tough leadership challenge, and I now it's a lesson that I learned, and I can look back on and say, it's really critical to go have those hard conversations. It's critical to lead up. It's critical to, take the tablecloth off the elephant in the middle of the room and say, hey, we need to talk about this.
Yeah.
We're not aligned. And one way that I help leaders today see if that's taking place is, how do they feel after a meeting? When you come out of a meeting, if you're sort of rehashing it, or you're having the meeting after the meeting, or you're replaying how that went, that could be an indication that there are things that you haven't addressed that you need to.
100%. It's funny because you hear a lot of the gurus talk about, it's the meeting before the meeting or the meeting after the meeting that's the real meeting. But you're right. If everybody leaves out of there and they feel good and they're energized and they go on their way, great. I can't tell you how many meetings I've left to where you get all the little subgroups over there, just talking amongst themselves. And yeah, they said they come to an agreement, but good and well that it's not settled. It wasn't addressed properly. No matter, do whatever to the best of your ability, it still doesn't make the fact that people still have their doubts or they're not bought in, or exactly. So that's a good barometer. I like that. On what's the vibe after the meeting? Oh, they encouraged, they're uplifted, they're excited, they go lots of smiles, or a lot of kind of scowls and backroom chatter.
Mm-hmm.
So the funny thing is, I ask this question every podcast, and not everybody's had a challenge that, okay, just because it's a leadership challenge doesn't imply, that I've improvised, adapted, and overcome. Sometimes, the tidal wave takes out the power plant, and shit's what happens. Okay.
Yes.
You could, all right, I'm going to put my nose to the grind and just work. Well, sometimes it doesn't work. And you're right. You don't realize, hey, how crucial it is to have those, hard conversations going up, almost like, hey, it's better to cut ties now than wait another 3 or 4 years and watch this devolve, versus no set of leaders and founders can answer to 4 different boards that aren't on the same sheet, that don't come together at the same time. It makes my head hurt just thinking about it. I've seen, enough one board be contentious enough. I couldn't imagine. Like, you got 4 of them that are, all have their individual, their goals, their aspirations, their things that they're looking for. Because obviously one from the donors is going to be different than the finance. Is going to be different from the, hey, here's what you're going to have to do to continue to operate in our country. Everybody's looking at this different. And I can understand some, hey, I just gave $500,000, man, I want my say. Or I just gave $1 million for this university, I want my say in what's going to happen, which is a whole different ballgame on, yeah, but that's not what the, esteemed president wants to happen in his nation. And we're kind of guests over here. So it's, that would definitely make it tough. That's a significant challenge, but I like the fact that, realize that not every challenge is something that can be overcome.
Well, sometimes overcoming is rebuilding, getting back up after you get knocked down and figuring out, okay, what can I learn from that? Maybe it's a new company or a new venture or a new opportunity. But yeah, hopefully, we can learn from other people's mistakes. Sometimes we have to learn from our own.
Well, at least the ones, if there is a silver lining to that horrible black cloud, the good thing is the ones you typically learn the hard way on your own, you don't ever forget, and they run deep. And so it's kind of like, okay, trust me on this one. I had this egg in my face. You don't want to go down this road.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. One of the things I think it's equipped me to do is to work in situations where there is misalignment and there is tension or latent conflict or open conflict.
Yeah.
And help people, because it feels hard in the moment to go address that stuff. Especially if you've made an effort before and it wasn't successful, to then circle back and say, okay, no, we really do need to come to the table and get resolution. That can feel daunting. So I feel equipped to step into those scenarios and say, this is really worth it. It's worth the effort. It's worth the pain.
Well, especially if you've come through on the other end of it before and see how disastrous it can be if you don't. Then
Yes.
you realize how big the stakes are, no matter, of course, the stakes being a relative term, depending on the organization, the size of the problem, and whatever.
Yep.
But nonetheless, it doesn't change the fact that the stakes are really high. I realize how high the stakes are, and there's nothing worth putting off this conversation to not get this to end up with potentially a really bad result.
Yeah.
So, well, let me jump into this one. Kind of on a bit of a lighter note, as my head still hurt thinking, oh my God, I had to report to 4 different boards. Just shoot me. Oh, better you than me, boss. That's all I say. But what do you think is one of the biggest mistakes that leaders make today?
Too much time doing and not enough time thinking.
Ooh, I like that. Do tell, do tell.
Well, the further you rise up in leadership, the less you should be actually doing yourself. Other people who are doing their jobs need the assurance of knowing the folks up at the top are taking the time to think deeply, to reflect, to do the deep work, to look out ahead. And if those folks at the top are still engaged in the weeds or making all of these decisions or approving things and checking on stuff, then they're not doing the leadership work that everyone else is counting on them to do. If you're a supervisor or a project manager or a department head, you really hope that person at the top has got their eyes up and is looking down the road. So, but I see a lot of leaders at all levels, but especially at senior and executive levels, who are still too much involved in day-to-day operations and decision making instead of doing the deep work. One of the challenges I think that keeps leaders from doing that deep work is they feel non-productive. When a leader sits at his or her desk and stares out the window and thinks about the business for an hour, at the end of that, what box do you check? What got moved forward? What feels like traction or progress? Nothing. In fact, you may have thought about the problem all day and not come to a solution.
Gotcha.
But what if it's the kind of problem that's not going to get resolved without multiple days of chewing on it and then maybe going and having a conversation and getting some outside input or reading up on some industry intel or looking at trends and allowing all of that to percolate and run through until you come to that moment of insight or deeper understanding. Until you've done that work, you may not get to the thing that you're like, okay, this feels like progress. I've done something. And leaders like to feel productive.
You got the checklist, man, and you got to cross stuff off on the checklist to feel like you've done something.
And so that drive to be productive actually becomes the enemy of them doing what they should do, which is sit still and think, or have a conversation, or read, or consider, or put this together with that, together with this, and spin it around several different ways and go, now I know what we should do. And I think that's a huge mistake, and people suffer because no one at the top was doing that.
Well, it's funny you mentioned about Maxwell before, and one of the things I remember him saying in a talk one time is that he talked about leaders, in that case, executive leadership, CEOs, that type of stuff. They talk about them seeing more and them seeing before. That they have that higher view, they're looking at a longer timeline, and they've got a broader spectrum on what they should be looking at than, like I said, being focused in on individual, tasks, KPIs, such like that. And I think it's interesting when you mention about that, because I've seen so many folks that fall into that category. And I feel like I have to get involved. And what does that do to the motivation if you've got a mid-level manager, department head, supervisor, well, when you've hired them to do this task and you're on them like white on rice, I mean, you're, oh, what about this? What about this? What about, well, hey, you hired me to do this. Either if you want to do it, you do it. If not, let me do it. And if I have a problem, I'll come talk to you. You know, as long as they're properly trained and equipped, it really takes a lot of the motivation out of the mid-level. It's like, well, why do I even bother? No matter what I do, it's going to be, they feel like it's going to be wrong, you know? And when it comes from a senior level executive, a question is not necessarily always a question. I remember Marshall Goldsmith told a story one time where he had done some coaching work with some Navy admirals, and they were trying to, do up a contract. It's like, no. This whole like paid from the federal government is like way too much work. Like, I'm not trying to, like, I don't need the money that bad. I wouldn't mind a ride on one of them airplanes. That would be cool. He said, we can work out a trade. He said, but, I'm not trying to do the whole federal procurement thing, whatever. So you can get some ride on a fighter pilot, whatever. But he's talking to one of the admirals, and you're like, the admiral comes and asks this guy a question, and the guy runs off and does whatever. And he's like, you do realize that when you ask a question, it's not coming across as a question. Hey, how are those numbers? Or, hey, why isn't this? Or whatever the question be, they take it as an order. And a lot of times when they're asking those types of questions in the absence of a formal, okay, you're reporting back numbers to me or you're having an issue, it comes across, oh, wait a minute, maybe I should be doing something else. Let me jump on what they just asked the question about. And even though it's not intentionally trying to monkey with the system, unfortunately, it ends up having that downstream effect. And I think it's, like you said, it's just not productive for the organization at all. And I think, unfortunately, too, this is something that we learned from some mutual friends of ours. I think sometimes the motivations, that's a good way to put it. The way senior and executive leadership structures the things that motivate the department heads to do what they do sound great at the time, and they probably pass muster with human resources, but they're not productive to growing the overall size and revenue of the organization. So, if I'm I talk about motivation all the time, and everyone's thinking I'm talking like some Tony Robbins rah-rah motivation crap. I'm like, no. What drives your department heads to do what they do? When you're talking about silos, Joe's a department head, and he once a year, he's like, here's how much you're allowed to spend. Now tell me what you're going to do with it, right? So budget and KPIs. And he knows if I stay under budget and I make my KPIs, I get my bonus. Mama gets to go to Hawaii. Everything is good. But if I reach across the aisle and I help you with your department, now all of a sudden we're growing the whole organization. But for some reason, I don't make budget or I don't make my KPIs. I don't get my bonus. Mama doesn't go to Hawaii and I'm stuck on the couch. Like, I ain't sleeping on the couch for you. Right? That ain't happening. So I'm going to not blaming the department head, but it puts a very perverse set of incentives to, I need to stay in my lane and only focus on my department and not really work collaboratively with the rest of the senior leadership team or departments to really, do what I can do to help grow the whole organization. So I think a lot of times that can come into play as well. And it's easy for the senior leadership to, like I said, kind of monkey around with those type of things and not set it up to make it more of a collaborative workspace. But no, I like that. Not enough thinking and too much doing.
Yes.
That's good. I like that. I like that quite a bit. So with that, let's close out this segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. David. We will come back with our last question and then how listeners can connect with you and soak up all the goodness of Masterminds leadership. So we will be back in just a few moments with our last segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. Welcome back to our final segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. And we are here with Dr. Phillip Shero, and we are going to hit our last question for the podcast. What do you think is the best way for leaders to improve their leadership skills?
To get regular, honest feedback, especially on what I call impact awareness.
Okay, so, I'm digging that. Tell me more about impact awareness.
Yeah, so I believe there's 3 levels of awareness. Whenever I work with leaders, almost everybody says, oh, I'm self-aware. I know who I am. I know my personality. I'm comfortable in my skin. that may be true to various levels, but most leaders will tell me, yeah, I'm pretty self-aware. I'm like, hey, that's fantastic. That's the first level of awareness is
Yeah.
you know yourself, your strengths and your weaknesses, your personality preferences, all that. Great. We have tools to help you deepen that self-awareness. And I think there's a lot more depth to leaders than they realize. But hey, that's great. That's level one. The
Right.
next level of awareness is other awareness. That's where I understand that you and I are not the same. You think differently. You have different strengths. You have a different communication style. And there's value in your style. So
Yes.
for me, other awareness is not just, oh, I'm a good judge of character. I'm great in interviews. I can tell whether this is going to be a good employee or not. That's not really other awareness.
No.
Other awareness is where I see the differences between us and I can recognize the value you bring that may be different than the value that I bring or that I might prefer. So that's level two, and it's really critical to growing influence. If you think that I, your boss, do not see your value, how much influence will I have over you?
Not much.
Not much, man. If you don't think I'm a value to the team, then why should I listen to your opinion? Okay, you signed my check, so great. I'll phone it in. But
Yeah.
Understanding and valuing differences is critical to that platform of having influence as a leader. But the third level of awareness, I find very few leaders go there. And it's what I call impact awareness.
Okay.
Impact awareness is where I become aware of the impact I create on other people. So you mentioned in the last segment about leaders asking a question that's not really a question. People take it as a command or, well, the leader asked about it. That's what they care about. So I better go do all of that. So if the leader asks a question and they don't understand the impact that question just created for other people, then they are blind at that third level of awareness. They don't have impact awareness. They don't know how their presence, they're looking over somebody's shoulder, they're sitting in a meeting with their arms crossed, or the way they critique something, or they don't understand the weight of their words and how that can completely change somebody's focus for a day. When you lack impact awareness, you also lack motivation to change. So your question was, what's the best way for leaders to improve? Well, for a leader to improve, they have to change something that they're doing.
Gotcha.
Something that's going on, in the way I talk, the way I show up, the way I do what I do. If I'm going to improve, then something has to change. Most of us are not really that motivated to change. We like the status quo. Even if we say, well, I want constant improvement, continual improvement for the organization, but me,
I'm comfortable. I'm good.
I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah.
Or, I want to get better, but we don't realize getting better means we have to change. And I find that impact awareness is a powerful motivator to change. When I start realizing how me doing most of the talking in the meeting impacts other people by smothering their ideas and making them hold information to themselves and not tell me the bad news. And when I see the impact of my behavior, I'm powerfully motivated to change that behavior. So if leaders really want to get better, if they want to improve, I think they need regular, honest feedback on how their behavior impacts other people.
Wow. No, I like that. And it's funny you had mentioned about that, because one of the things to kind of go along with the question from the admiral, the question from the general is not a question, it's an order, is I remember kind of another story from Marshall Goldsmith talking about leaders adding too much value. And of course, if you listen to popular stuff that's out there, like, oh my God, there's no way to add too much value. The world revolves around adding value. You got to add value and value. Stop it. But he talks about leaders adding too much value, and at some point, I'm like, all right, I'm a sucker. What does he mean by adding too much value? Well, if somebody comes to you as a boss and they're like, hey boss, I got this great idea, blah 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 blah, blah, and they are jazzed, they are pumped, they are ready to like, I'm going to take that hill, right? I mean, we're going to make this thing happen. And instead of saying, wow, that's awesome, great job, go forth and conquer, let me know what you need, they might honestly, legitimately look at the plan and be like, that's pretty good, Susie, but if you tweak this one thing here, here, and here, and see what it did, yeah, you technically might make the plan 5% better, but you've destroyed 50 to 75% of their motivation to do it, because now that you've made tweaks to it, it's your plan, not their plan.
That's right.
And so you talk about impact awareness, realizing that doing that, adding too much value, what the impact that has on the motivation and the drive and the engagement of the person who actually came up with that brilliant idea. Now all of a sudden you've taken the wind out of their sails, and they're like, yeah, whatever, I'll get to it. Add it to the list.
Absolutely. Once people see the impact of that behavior, they're willing to change, open to change. But the challenge I see is, who is willing to give open and honest feedback to a leader?
That, my friend, is why the good Lord created 360 degrees assessments. I'm not telling you you're a insert expletive of choice, jerk, whatever. I could add a bunch more, but save it for the recording. The data says, and that's what I like about those type of tools and instruments. Because you were talking about the self-awareness. Well, I might know that I'm a high D, but what do I know really what drives and motivates me? I mean, what are my top workplace competencies, and how do I judge and view and see the world, right? Yeah, you might have a cursory, but I even had somebody, and I'll use a name, not disparagingly, but a lady asked me about different surveys, and I'm kind of partial to ones with deep bench research departments at high degrees of reliability and validity, but and having normative data to know how I compare with the mean or 68% of the population is always a plus. Somebody asked me the other day, said, well, what do you think about strength finders? I'm like, well, for what it is, it's good. I mean, I have mine, and I'm top 5 and a useful tool. Squirrel moment. A lot of folks, I don't want to have one useful tool, and now all of a sudden I got a hammer and everything's a nail. Like, I do everything I do off this one tool, and I have a cache of tools that I could use. Okay. But the lady asked me, she said, I can't wrap my head around the fact that I don't have any normative comparisons. She said, for the top 5, are these the 5 things I'm really, really good at? Or are these the 5 things I just suck at the least? Since you mentioned it, I really don't know. I can guarantee you that these are the 5 things that you suck at the least, but I don't know that you're really, really good at these. That's an excellent question. And like I said, I love the tool. Don't get me wrong. But I was like, wow, I never really thought about that. But you're right. Most leaders, if they are relatively self-aware, could go quite a bit deeper. And like you said, there's a difference between, from an emotional intelligence standpoint, all right, I have, social awareness and social regulation. I can read a room, I can realize, I can pick up a vibe, I can kind of, adapt accordingly, versus understanding, especially, in my bailiwick for senior leadership teams, if everybody knows how everybody else is wired and they're that other aware, and they know what they need to do to adapt, and they know how, like you said, there's no good or bad style, everybody brings value. And for me, it's important to really hammer in their heads. Now the communication style of drivers or whatever for everybody that's on your team, and it kind of answers now a lot of questions. They're looking at, now I know why Joe and Sue are at each other's throat. But you realize, hey, here's how they see themselves, but more importantly, here's how they come across under a moderate or a severe level of stress, pressure, fatigue, most important part, and don't even realize they're coming across that way.
Yeah.
So once you know that, you talk about the amount of grace and understanding you can lend to somebody. Like, wow, Joe's coming in here and just vomit 3 bullet points and run out the door like a jerk. I know I reverse engineer this a little bit. I'm like, I wonder what's going on. I wonder he's having a bad day. Like, is everything okay at home? You start looking at what's the stress that's causing him to kind of revert to this, and probably doesn't even realize how he's coming across. I think that's crucial when you're talking about other, understanding others and being others aware.
Yes, and I think this is where a good coach can really add a lot of value to a leader's self-development journey. As an outside coach will be willing to give that open and honest feedback, where an internal employee, they've got to weigh the risk of being honest.
Yes.
And is that going to be a good thing for them or not? Even if the boss asks for, just be honest with me. Tell me, how could I be better? And every employee's running
lies have no longer been uttered some places. I really want to know the honest feedback. You know good and well if you give it to them, like, I'm toast, man. My career here is over.
Yes. Yeah.
Bill, you're a jerk. And like I say, I'm cutting that down and being nice, right? And let me give you 3 concrete examples. Like I said, that's where, as a dealing in those psychometric assessments, there's something to be had about 360 surveys and things that kind of spread that around and be like, yeah, I'm not saying that you're like this. The data says it. So let's dive into the data, because that way it doesn't get personal as much and there's not as much blame going around. And like I said, you're looking at it from an objective third-party standard. But I think once, not just on an individual basis, but when that executive team can realize, all right, this is the roll up of my whole team. This is the data. This is how everybody's wired. This is how we all function in this company. Okay, now I know what I need to do to kind of meet you in the middle. You know what you need to do to kind of meet me in the middle. And it really, really greases the skids as far as, improving communication, enhancing collaboration, and more importantly, just the team itself being more productive.
Yes.
And so, no, I think that you hit the nail on the head as far as the probably not as self-aware as you realize, and you're really not as other aware as you realize, and that adding too much value just showed that, you don't even know there is a thing called impact awareness. But you could come in like, yeah, but I know a guy.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's hilarious. Speaking about which, anything else that you would think that you would throw in for leaders to good ways for leaders to improve their leadership skills before we wrap up?
Well, you talked about the psychometric instruments. That's a great source, whether it's a self-report or a 360, having an outside coach to give you that regular, honest feedback. Cultivating the dissenting voice inside your department. So there might be somebody that's a thorn in your side because they're your critic, or they've always got, they'll always tell it how it is. Recognizing that can be a value. You may not accept everything they say, but there's other people that thought about saying it and were afraid to. Sometimes cultivating that critic to say, okay, they're telling me something that other people are afraid to say. What can I take from that? And listen to,
like
and then becoming, and this takes time to build the trust, but becoming the kind of leader that people are not afraid to give bad news to. That if somebody comes to you, whether it's feedback to you as the leader or feedback about your pet project or how something is going, whenever people come to you with bad news, if they come to expect you'll respond calmly, rationally, you don't shoot the messenger, you stay curious and ask, okay, well, tell me more about this, and don't react. You can build a level of trust where people will be more honest with you. And wow, that starts throwing some light on blind spots, lets you see You get situational awareness. You start to see what's going on all around, make better decisions.
Well, versus the flip side of the coin, when you do react,
Yes.
and one of your team has a bad experience bringing something to you,
Yes.
that's going to spread like wildfire in a dried up field. That's just going to run the gamut, and everybody's going to know, hey, Bill just got his head cut off, or just head chewed off by Joe because he come and he got shot the messenger. I honestly think though, that is probably one of the things that just destroys innovation and feedback, because now all of a sudden people are going to keep their head below the radar screen. And how many people are going to be really actively engaged or be creative and innovative? I've never seen a lot of people be creative and innovative when their whole goal is to stay below the radar screen so they don't get whacked.
Yes.
And I think almost to that point, we had a recent guest on, Mike Mears. He was a former chief people officer for the CIA, and he developed their leadership academy, which is a fascinating story. But he's got a 3-part, and it goes right into what you're talking about. He's like, not saying this in a buzzwordy way, because when he first started using it, there was no real literature out on it, and it really wasn't his buzzword. But he talked about that base layer, the foundation of psychological safety, that people know that I'm not going to get my head chewed off because I come bring something to you. And if you can really get that cemented and have that solid base of psychological safety, then you start building organizational trust. And then once you get that layer, okay, they feel like they're safe, they actually trust me, then you said the last level is clarity.
Yeah.
Then you can get clear on the goals, the mission, and what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to do. And once you accomplish those 3 things, he said, then you can just literally pour gasoline on that fire and turn it up to 11 and just push and get stuff done, because they know where you're coming from. They know you got your back. They know you're not trying to stab them in the back. They know they trust you, and they know exactly where they're going and what they're doing. Now you're really talking about a highly engaged team. And like I said, you could really dial it up at that point. But if you foul up any of those steps, from what he was saying, like, not doing yourself a lot of favors.
Yeah. Well said.
Well, I said plays exactly to what you said, just framed a little bit differently. That's all. So with that, tell our listeners how they can connect with you, connect with Masterminds Leadership, your book, website, LinkedIn, whatever, man. How are they like, man, I got to get me some more Phillip? Well, how will they make that happen?
Yeah. Well, if listeners only do one thing, I hope you'll reach out and send me a connection request on LinkedIn. I promise I will say yes, unless you're offering to generate, 20 new leads a month with your marketing plan.
Other than help you with your podcast, right? I can get your SEO. You can get started on my inbox. So.
Yeah, but yeah, I hope people will send me a connection request on LinkedIn. If they're looking for some free resources, I have almost 70 videos on our YouTube channel.
Wow.
So Masterminds Leadership on YouTube, about 70 videos, including 25 different leadership soft skills, how to solve accountability issues or do conflict management, all kinds of resources there. And that's free. Or they can go to our website, mastermindsleadership.com.
No problem. And we will have all those links in the description. Like I said, unless you're trying to, hey, would you like to generate 20 more appointments of it? Ignore that link. But beyond that, yes, please make sure and reach out to Phillip. Like I said, connect with him, utilize those resources. Like I said, there's a whole lot to say where you can go through a playlist and you can go to a YouTube channel. And like I said, learn a ton of different stuff for free and really equip you and your team and your organization. And then if you need to, dial it up from there, you might know a guy. I don't know. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
All right. So with that is it for this episode of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. And we will see you all next time. Take care.